Welcome. I'm Jay Leeming, and this is a podcast. It's real. And I'm sitting here with Sam Buggeln at the Cherry Art Space in Ithaca, New York. Sam is a theater director and a man of many talents beyond that. And hey, we're just going to talk about the Odyssey, because he directed the Odyssey a while back, and I've been exploring that story as well. Thanks for being here, Sam.
Thank you for having me, Jay.
You're welcome. So the Odyssey, yeah. So you directed this production, and why did you pick the Odyssey? What inspired you to take that on?
Yeah, it was a big outdoor production that my company, a small sort of more experimental theater company called the Cherry Arts, co-produced with The Hangar, which is also in Ithaca, a big, wonderful summer theater that does big splashy productions. And we had wanted to collaborate for a while, our two companies, and we thought about, we wanted to do something community-based because it was The Hangar's return to production and the Cherry's return to in-person production after, a suspension of a season for COVID. And so we thought, what's a story that we could pull a lot of community members together, do a sort of thing where we mixed professional actors, non-professional actors all together and create and just like created something big and fun and spectacular and moving outdoors. And it seemed like just the perfect story, especially since, and I say this with, a little ruefully, at the time it felt like a story of coming out of darkness and adventure and trauma into some comfortable home space. Seemed like it might be good timing, and it seems to have been a little bit early, but it did work beautifully in that moment.
And this was, just to be clear for the listeners, this was in the middle of the virus, basically. Yeah. As always, there were waves this way and that, but...
Yeah, it was in the end of August, beginning of September 2021.
Right.
Okay. In a big outdoor stage behind the Hangar Theater.
Cool. And was this different, Sam? You've directed a lot of plays, and I'm always impressed by the international array of plays. Just for our listeners, the Cherry really specializes in plays from other countries, bringing them alive here in America, which is a beautiful thing.
Thanks.
So you've got a lot of directing experience. The Odyssey, was it different from other theatrical productions?
Absolutely, because I had not actually adapted very much. This was the first one of a very small number of times that I've sat down with a piece of literature from a non-theatrical genre and made it into a play. I do a fair amount of translating, and so the idea of looking at a text and making into a new text was not unfamiliar, and it had some similarities, but I also decided on a structure. Obviously, when you want to make the Odyssey happen in 90 minutes, you have to cut a lot of things.
Totally, yeah.
And decide on how to, and the theater requires really very propulsive kind of structure in order to keep everyone sitting still for 90 minutes or 100 minutes.
Right. Yeah, and the Odyssey in particular comes with a lot of dust on it sometimes.
Yes.
Like it's in a museum. Oh, it's the Odyssey, when it began as something, told by storytellers, in very different ways, depending on the occasion. So I'm curious, did you change anything? Or did you?
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. To go to your notion of it having grown out of the oral storytelling tradition, I was startled to read, and I don't know what the latest thinking is, that there is thinking that Homer might not have been a person. Homer might have just been a tradition from a time, and who was the person or group of people who ultimately wrote it down in this shape, landed on something that was out of an oral tradition, and it's not, we shouldn't necessarily think of the text as being like Dickens's, or that where a person made this decision about this structure. And so I would say knowing that, and then knowing that working from a variety of translations that then had their own variances between them, I felt pretty free. Mm-hmm. Honestly, even if I hadn't, the imperatives of making something work on the stage they require changes. Mm-hmm. it was a nice. I felt quite good about. I felt like ethically fine about making changes, given the distance between now and this text. Like whatever it takes to make the connection the hottest,
Right.
seemed right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And where were those connections for you in this story? Like what seemed to resonate with you and with your audience?
Yeah, I think. I guess I can say the maybe stereotypically what I was surprised at how much of the Odyssey is not about Odysseus' voyage, specifically his voyage from Troy back to Ithaca. That there's, there are what we might call framing devices now but they're so large as to be bigger than frames, about his son's voyage, and that's something that even had there been time to include it, I felt like the mere fact of Telemachus going on a big sea voyage, which doesn't wind up accomplishing super much except him hearing that his father is alive and hearing some of those adventures, and then making it back, was such a big deal that he is then, I think, considered to be a man in a way that he hadn't been before. And so I think one of the interesting things for me was reading it enough to be like, oh, this must have been having this effect then, and I don't think it would automatically have it now. And so, cutting all of the Telemachus material is I am following a well-trod path of many adapters in doing that. But even so, there was stuff. There was just always an interesting exercise to be like, what did this mean then? And one thing that was really interesting, an easy change, is that Poseidon, when Odysseus kills blinds the Cyclops and then identifies himself as he gloats over the blinded Cyclops and identifies himself to the Cyclops calls upon his father Poseidon, and Poseidon curses Odysseus. This is part of Odysseus' hubris in wanting to tell the Cyclops who he is, and that creates the curse. Poseidon curses him to not make it home, or if he does make it home, that he make it home with no ships, no sailors, and naked, basically stripped to his bare essence. And so this curse, as curses do, comes true. But in the Odyssey, he washes up on. You're going to tell me the name of the island he washes up on?
Well, Calypso. She cares for him, and then the Phaeacians.
The Phaeacians, exactly.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I feel like to us, let's say, we want him to wash up home, naked with nothing,
right,
and have to establish himself as king. But I think that, and I'm just making this up. A scholar could confirm or say that I'm wrong. I think it would have been too shameful for an adventuring warrior to wash up at home with no treasure. So we fulfill the curse by having him wash up naked and alone at the Phaeacians. He identifies himself as the king of Ithaca and tells wonderful stories, and they load him with treasure so that he can arrive loaded with treasure, which is the thing that he has to do because he's the king.
Right.
So for us, it seems like we cut the Phaeacians, he washes up at home alone and naked, and that was like an easy suture that was, I think, much more satisfying to us than it would then the sort of more complex one of the original would be.
Right. So you cut the whole Phaeacian.
We cut the whole Phaeacian
Yeah.
thing. The other thing about the Phaeacian thing, and I warned you before that unfortunately I feel like I know these like mechanics very well, so I'll speak the mechanics.
That's
and
great. I want
other
the
people will
mechanics.
speak
Yeah,
to the poetry and the ideas.
I love it.
But the Phaeacians are he tells the Phaeacians the entire story. That's how we get the whole story of his journey. Is in him being persuaded to tell it to his wealthy hosts with, in the comfort of a beautiful palace being plied with wine. And so, again, if you were to recreate that on stage, it would take away a lot of suspense. You know, I think we know that he's going to make it, but we don't actually want to see him tell it from a plush couch.
I see. Yeah.
With a glass of wine.
He's like home and dry with a glass of wine. Yeah, too relaxed.
Too relaxed.
Right,
So we just cut the sort of that sort of frame of like, where is he when he's telling the story, was we just cut completely from the production, so that it's just the production tells the story.
Yeah. Did he have treasure in your version when he washed up on the shore?
No.
He did no treasure.
No treasure,
Yeah,
no treasure.
No stuff.
Honestly, that was easy to cut because there's so much. You have to cut so much.
Yeah. No, I love hearing this, Sam, because I mean, we want to make this story alive
Yeah,
and live and
yeah.
breathe. And yes, I mean, I love the scholarship at times, you know, to hear, and we think he said this for this reason and stuff.
Right.
There's a scene with the sirens, right? And Cersei tells him to put wax in his ears.
Yes.
And at first, when I told that, I made him think of it because I thought he's supposed to be Mr. Clever, right? Can't he think of this? You know.
Yeah.
But I realized what I was doing was taking some of her power away. 'Cause
Yes.
she's a very strong woman presence in the play.
Yes.
So that's, and I guess I learned from that.
Right,
I learned,
right.
you know, this is about his cleverness, but it's also about his sort of need to be schooled by these other powers. You know?
That is an interesting point about some of the distances between that I found that I don't know that I was conceptually able to bridge for myself, and I think it's okay, but I really thought that if I looked closely enough, I would find the way in which he solved every challenge by cleverness with a different, like, excitingly, you know, witty intrigue, and mostly I couldn't find it. Mostly it seemed like terrible things happened, and often he is unable to persuade his crew to do the right thing, and then they all suffer as a result. And so there's a kind of like bad classist thing that seemed like a way in which that would be read in a classist way that would be unfortunate for us today.
Like he knows more than his crew.
He knows more than his crew. They're always trying to. He's always trying to talk them into doing the right thing because he got the prophecy or he got the information from whoever, and they can't, and so they all suffer. But that became a nice opportunity to invest in some crew members. Like, so to me, one of the like most moving parts of the production was when, again, I'm going to forget his name, but there's a troublemaker sailor who I feel like mostly is like the sailor who stands up and says, I don't like that idea.
Yeah.
He sort of starts to emerge.
Eurylochus, maybe.
Eurylochus.
Yeah.
And they're at the island of the sun, the very end, like they're reduced to the last ship, the last survivors of the last ship, plus Odysseus. And they were told, just sail by. Do not stop there. And because the flock is there, it's the sun's flock, you must not slaughter any of the sun's flock. And they're on the boat, and he's like, sail by, we're gonna sail by, and Eurylochus says, and maybe I'm even conflating characters now, I can't believe you're going to ask us to do this. We've been like sleeping on this boat in the dark, in the storms for, weeks on end. And it's this beautiful, lush island. We're going to spend one night. It's going to be fine. And then of course they get there. They're landlocked. The wind goes away. They're starving. The flock is right there. And then Eurylochus again says, I would rather die. I would rather die on sea, cursed, than starve to death here. And they're really like, I think that's where for me, for this audience, this sort of meaty ethical things come in. Like, if there is a curse that you have to obey, but there is some moral imperative that's been visited on you by irrational gods, and you have to obey it, but it feels like it's going to kill you. Are you allowed to just say screw it?
Right.
What did that mean then, and what does it mean now? That was, I think, Maybe that's been the question all along.
Well, and that moment sort of resonated, you felt, with
Yes.
yourself or with audiences? Of
Yeah,
like,
both.
screw the curse, I'm going to
Both
just
screw
do
the
it.
screw the curse, screw the Yeah, he says if the sun god is so jealous that if this is really the sun god's flock, we'll slaughter one, we'll slaughter to the sun god, we'll sacrifice it to the sun god, we'll do all the ceremonies, and then when we survive, because we ate this one cow, and we get home, if we get home, we will build a temple to the sun god. We will devote the rest of our lives to the sun god. And if he's that jealous, we're gonna that he strikes us down. Fucking, we're gonna starve to death here anyway.
Right.
And so I feel like these moments of like really people in extremis were very, very potent and identifiable. Almost more, and actually like the leader being like, I have this information and I'm trying to sell this to you, and I understand it sounds ridiculous and I just don't know if I can make you all believe it. But to me, that's a space that's less easy to identify with. I have supernatural information.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to get you,
yeah.
and I'm trying to persuade mere mortals to understand it.
Well, certainly for us today.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, totally. Yes.
Well, and I'm wondering, and I'm going to say here to the listeners, Sam and I are communing with the elements of water and air here, as you may notice. We've got some pipes, we got some blowing stuff, so that's just all part of the game here, part of the dance, if you hear some crackling and whooshing in the background. Well, I wanted to ask you about the supernatural elements, right? Because there's all these gods and stuff, and theater in America mostly tends to be about people.
Yeah.
And, we don't have supernatural forces in our plays. How was that? Was that difficult or?
Oh, it was great. I really, really enjoyed that. The gods piece was really fun to play with because and actually, if you'll permit me one digression. To which you can cut if you want. But we did play from Argentina, as you said. We do a lot of international plays, and this is a play about a young woman who badly wants to be a saint, and she thinks she does everything right. It's kind of funny. It's kind of tragic. It plays really, really big in Argentina, which is a very, very Catholic country. And at the end, I don't think I'm giving anything away. She winds stigmata appear on her hands, and she kind of has a seizure and passes out and comes to and has had a very strange vision, and and in the talk back to the play, the audience was all like, "Oh, it's so interesting, this portrait of a psychological breakdown," and like everybody interpreted it that way.
Right.
Nobody did it
Wow.
occur that in the world of the play she may have in fact one friend of mine who's a sort of lapsed Catholic said it's completely not a psychological breakdown. That's an actual thing happened to her that is very
Right.
clearly happens to the Catholic faith when you become visited by.
But we think it's happening in your head.
Yeah, we're
because
like,
it can't happen in
yeah.
reality.
It's a tribute to the goodness of the play that it can read both ways, but it was
Yeah.
very interesting that nobody was interested in the idea that it was actually supernatural.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the idea, the more we all worked on the story, the more it became clear that a bunch of sort of bickering bureaucrats with jealousies and fiefdoms making decisions that were sometimes arbitrary, sometimes necessary, but usually feel really cruel, that that idea as an explanation of the old question of bad things happening to good people is not a worse idea than any idea we can provide right now. We don't have anything better.
Right.
Honestly.
Definitely,
So it was kind of it was kind of amazing to just dive into embodying them and then having the characters who have some limited amount of access to the gods, the people like Calypso or Io, the sea nymph that gets him out of the water at the end when he's that tells him to kick off all his clothes and swim, and that's the only way he'll get to shore.
Right.
It's super exciting to to invest in that whole different kind of hierarchy of power to explain the unexplainable, which we're still trying to explain.
Right.
You know.
And you felt audiences could swallow that in your production for the most part.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, we made them very. I don't think it was a stretch at all to make them really human. They just get in. You know. They just get in. You know, and whether this was accurate or not, like, so it's Athena, right, who sort of protects him throughout, and we're just like, he's a warrior, and that's her people, but he's a very sensitive, smart warrior, and so she has a particular interest in him, and that gave that actor enough fuel to like just get in there, and like she's just constantly angling with Zeus. Zeus can't really easily overrule Poseidon, who has doomed him with this curse. Athena's job is to get in there and advocate for him, and to like eventually like actually come down to earth and intervene, but only after she gets permission from Zeus, because Poseidon's out of town. Like, all that seemed really like it all seemed like an episode of The West Wing, as much as anything.
Totally.
You know?
There's a great story, a little story I heard about a rural library program in Colombia, where they would bring books to rural communities that didn't have them, and the libraries would. And they'd go and get them like 6 months later. And there was a community which wouldn't give back their copy of the Iliad.
Wow.
Yeah, and people were like, why? Now, they gave back their copy of the Odyssey, but not I don't know why. But they were like this world of bickering gods who make arbitrary decisions, just like you described, Sam, is the world we live in.
Yeah.
You know, we're subject to these forces. So.
Absolutely. There's, it was one of the fun things, being a translator who was adapting a thing from a language I don't speak at all, it was fun to work from this bunch of different translations and sort of like pluck images, or most often I guess make up my own from the combination, but sometimes a turn of phrase was just so good from one or the other that I just took it. And a very recent, much celebrated translation used the word, Zeus used the phrase, Zeus sold me into, I used to be a king, Zeus sold me into slavery, he felt like it. And looking at the other, he felt like it. And looking at the other translations, I was like, no, that's all they got, you know, like sooner or later, sometimes Zeus says, you know, he's accused of being cruel and sinking the final ship, and he's like, oh, that was easy. That was easy. The sun god was gonna take the chariot into Hades forever. Right. Come on, that's not even a hard decision. Yes,
no-brainer.
Totally.
Right.
But sometimes he just feels like it.
The arbitrariness. It's interesting because a while back I saw a production of a play about climate change, which was well done in its way. But I left with this feeling that something had been missed, because it was a good play about the effects of climate change on humans. And I felt, and this is not a dig at theater, but more at where we're at, climate change wouldn't fit on the stage.
Yeah.
Right? Like the forests, the oak trees. So it's part of our myopia as a culture, because it seems to me theater in the past, and certainly storytelling, welcomed these beyond the human powers.
The epic stories.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I found myself saying a few minutes ago that this question of why do bad things happen to good people is one of the great questions that occupies us all the time. And then I was my brain was like, actually most new theater is not interested in questions that big. Most new theaters. That seems to me a shame and a missed opportunity. But we're very, U.S. theater right now is very in a sort of psychological naturalism, realism, I think it was very exciting to work on something that had such a vast tapestry of decision making. The other thing we did, and I feel like I'm burying the lead a little bit, was that we very much wanted to be the story in some way of a community that was making its way home, and a community that was creating this piece of work, rather than the story of a sort of white cis heterosexual male
Right.
hero. And so that the Odysseus traded off over the course of the production, so that there was someone that we call it begins with the invocation to the Muse, and so the Muse comes out, and then we realized, and she became something of a narrator, but we realized she was no longer really the Muse, but a fate. So the Muse becomes the fate, and then just tells the second person Odysseus, you do this, you do that, in this adaptation. Tells them what happens, and so for every adventure, the fate sort of selects someone, an unwilling person, and eventually flirts with the idea that she might select someone from the audience, which never happens. But we we make people worried. Enough.
Right.
Kind of like you're up now. The bad thing is going to happen to you. Now the impossible decision will be put to you.
Right.
Are you going to go with Scylla and know you're going to lose 6 of your men are going to die, 6 of your crew are going to die, or Scylla or Charybdis and toss a coin?
Yeah.
You know.
So the vision of this production was a community production.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. In a co-produced by 2 professional theaters, but really a big, exciting mix of people with absolutely no stage experience at all through to extremely seasoned stage veterans and a whole professional design crew and director and all that. So it was so it wound up being very exciting. Yeah.
That's cool. And we're in Ithaca. I don't know if that means anything, Sam. Does it?
Yeah.
I mean, what's the deal?
That's interesting. As I look at, I'm quite proud of the adaptation and sort of have been told I should shop it around to schools and universities and stuff like that. And I'm curious how the Ithaca thing lands, because it was really fun to be able to work in. I mean, I think for us, it was a really lovely just connection to the idea of like, I'm trying to get home to Ithaca, and it was an opportunity to work in some in jokes.
Right.
In fact, and so I suppose those just won't land in other productions. But that was it certainly was part of choosing the play, choosing this story.
And at the end, he kills a bunch of people at the end, right? Do you feel like, from your work with the story, do you feel he changes as a character? Does he grow? Or is he kind of the same warrior he was at the beginning, at the end?
I think that is a really good question, and I think that it is classically one of the things that now we're there are people who would say it's not even a play or a story if the protagonist doesn't learn and grow and change by the end.
Yeah.
I don't think that was necessarily an opinion shared by, quote, Homer, unquote. I think there's a big part of the tradition that was just about vanquishing your enemies. He came back and he vanquished, and it took him a long time, and but he got back and he triumphed. I think the way we made that seem more interesting was by breaking him apart by making him multiple people, so that so that we can get behind the idea of all of us going through a series of horrible things and coming out the other side okay, battered and having lived through loss and grief, but okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it seems to me there's an emotional momentum to those moments toward the end, which, though we have these ideas, which I share, I don't want to see a bunch of people get killed, obviously, but so much of our pop culture, certainly, and many of our stories, you have evil and you have good, and if they just shake hands and make an agreement, that's very satisfying but it's kind of mental, like the heart is kind of like, punch that guy.
Yeah, totally. Oh, that's so interesting. I certainly the moment where he and Telemachus, right? They lock in all of the suitors and who have been kind of imprisoning Penelope and co. and eating them out of house and home. They lock them all in the room and then slay them all. And I wasn't tempted to change that. We did that in glorious slow motion gruesome deaths. The only thing we changed was that Penelope also has one of the bows.
As one of the what?
One of the bows. She's one of the. She joins.
Right.
She joins Odysseus and Telemachus in the slaying. And
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So that seemed only fair.
Mhm.
Yeah. No, I don't think. I mean, again, to us, like, I don't honestly know that breaking Odysseus into multiple characters was even that unfaithful to ways writers thought about story and character back then. You know, there's a lot of research and thinking about Shakespeare that our sort of post-19th century psychological naturalism way of analyzing character is not going to be terribly useful. That he was more about, like, you know, we can find things that are inconsistent, like whether Lady M has children or not seems to change from scene to scene, and you just have to play it as being whatever is being true in each scene as it comes, and the audience doesn't care. So I think that the idea that he started out needing to learn something and he learned it is the kind of oversimplified psychology that we love in U.S. theater in a 90-minute play written for the United States audience right now that they didn't think was real or true. I think he comes out battered and like having suffered and having lived through a lot and older, you know, and I think we feel that very powerfully. But the amount of time I spent looking for a little lesson that he would learn in each adventure was not rewarded.
Yeah. That's fascinating. We bring so much to these stories from where we are now.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks so much for talking to me. I just have one last question.
Sure.
Is there a moment of this story which grabs you the most? You know, I know you're the director of all these people, but or that did grab you in production.
The thing that I don't know if it is in the original or if it just happened that it was really fascinating was that the adventures we just focused on as I said, just on his specific adventures heading home. They started off funny and ended up very, very dark and serious, and it was a really smooth trajectory, so that at the beginning, Cyclops is one of the most famous stories, and we did it with puppets to change the scale so that, like, the sailors, Odysseus and the sailors all became sort of foot-tall puppets, so a full-size actor could play Cyclops and have him be really huge, Polyphemus, and then so we were swapping out scale, and the lambs were adorable, and so that was a kind of comical, gruesome but comical scene. And then by the end, by Scylla and Charybdis, we decided not to show the monster at all, not to embody the monster, but just to focus on the experience of being in the boats and rowing. He just says, row as fast as you can, and they keep rowing, and while 6 of their number are gruesomely torn, hauled out of the boats and eaten, and what he says, how he describes it, he says it was the worst thing he saw, was his men being, it makes me choke up, being dragged from the boat, screaming his name, screaming for him to save them, and he's made the decision to, rather than going by Charybdis and flipping a coin on the whole boat being lost, himself included, he's going to go by Scylla, and 6 of his people will be taken. And he can't tell them he's made that decision. He just has to tell them row.
Right.
That was so powerful. It was a really powerful scene, too. It really worked. I'm proud of it.
Yeah. And he yelled his name, of course, earlier,
Yes.
when he's boasting, right?
Yeah, when he's
Cyclops.
boasting, he
Like,
yells
I'm
his name.
Odysseus.
I'm Odysseus. And this, that comes full circle with his doomed sailors yelling his name as they are dragged to their horrible eating deaths.
Thank you. Yeah, and rowing between these two evils.
Rowing between the two evils. Yeah, that was a good little stone I felt like I turned over was that I think I had thought the story was supposed to be about like the golden mean, finding the middle way between two evils, but it's really not. It's like you have to choose. They're both horrible, and you have to pick one.
Yeah, right.
And that seemed it seemed like what it was, but also like a much more potent to lean into. Yeah.
There's a tiger behind both doors.
There's a tiger behind both doors, and you just have to pick.
Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Yep.
This was fun to talk about.
Yeah, it's fun to feel the story alive.
Yeah.
Between us and in the world as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thanks a lot. You can find out more about Sam and the Cherry Arts at their website, which is cherryarts.org. Is that
thecherry.org.
Thecherry.org, exactly.
Thanks.
Sam makes the unseen visible, which is what theater people do. So, thanks a ton for talking about this.
Thanks, Jay. What a pleasure.
You're welcome.